Welcome. Welcome to the studio in Bath. Haven't seen many of you before, so it's really lovely to have you all in. I'll hand over to Alicia in a moment. We've got a little bit of housekeeping to do. And just to let you know who we are Bath Spa's Innovation and Enterprise Hub. We look after about 40 creative micro businesses, all working with creative and immersive technologies and with social impact. We are really interested in supporting the creative economies in a way that creates sustainable businesses and sustainable practice as well, that means that people's work is somewhere that they want to be. So we're not really interested in being an accelerator. We're more about kind of sustainable growth. We've just moved our residency models towards a more sharing economy style system, and we've got residency applications are open now. So if you are a creative, an artist, a designer, a small business, and you're looking for a community to be part of, to contribute to, and space to work, please do check out our website, and our join page has got details of all of the residency that we offer. We do have a large library of immersive and creative tech, which is in these cupboards behind us, including VR headsets, haptic suits, LiDAR scanners, mocap systems, 360 cameras, ambisonic field recorders, binaural heads. All of that equipment is available for residents to use, but also local businesses for kind of testing work. So if you're interested in doing any work with any of that kit, if you're looking for immersive R&D or creative tech R&D support, reach out to us. We're often able to connect residents up with external partners. Right, housekeeping. If you need the loo, we have an all-gender accessible toilet on the ground floor by the back door. There are men's loos on the first floor up the stairs, and women's loos are right up the top, I'm afraid. We're not expecting any more fire alarm tests today. We had one earlier, I got a headache. Our muster point, if one does happen, is in the back corner that way of the car park. Fire exits are through the back door or out the front door. We will meet you there. We try not to lose anyone. Cool, I'll pass you over to Alicia. Thank you so much for coming down. And,
thanks, Nick.
Thanks, Alicia.
Great, hi everyone. So my name's Alicia Borkowska, and I'm an architect and co-founder at YOU&ME Architecture. And I'm also a resident here. So as Nick said, part of the thing is it's supposed to be kind of encouraging collaboration and exchange. So I'm here to talk about some of my work, and I hope some of you will come back and talk about some of your work. And today I'm going to be talking about some of the work that we've done on high streets. So YOU&ME is an architecture practice. I think it was 10 years this year, but we're quite small. So it's myself and Iris Papadatu, who is the other co-founder. And we established we did the last bit of our architecture studies at the Royal College of Art. And we were always interested in like art and architecture and public realm and all these different scales and the kind of interface between all of them. And we were also really wanted to work on public projects. So right from the outset, we said, we're not going to do any residential work, we're just going to do public projects. So all of our work is working with a lot of local authorities and councils and institutions. And the reason we're called YOU&ME is we also do a lot of collaboration with our work. So in a lot of our projects, we find quite a good model is teaming up with other practitioners to often pitch for larger work. And then in that way, we get to be small, we get to have control, we get to have director input, but we also get to work on larger projects. And that's, as an architect, that's something you always do. You're always collaborating. You're never designing built projects on your own. You're working with engineers. But I think for us, it was really trying to draw in other sort of creatives and other architects and other artists in that process. And colour is quite important to our work. and also working together, not just with other creatives, but also working with the local community and local partners. So community engagement is always very sort of key to our process and kind of how we work, especially on high streets, because high streets is working very closely with the people on the high streets, the businesses, the landowners. So today, I think the common thread is really this kind of, our work is really centred around working in town centres and working on high streets. A lot of that work has historically been frontage based. So a lot of our initial early on projects involved looking at fronts of buildings, so only really skin deep, but looking at how we can restore a lot of kind of buildings above shops, looking at restoring shops, looking at inserting murals. And then more and more we're looking at buildings on the high streets. So existing community buildings, looking at improving them, looking at making them more accessible, looking at making them more sustainable, both financially, but also in terms of sort of retrofit. And also looking at sort of heritage buildings on our high streets. There's so many incredible heritage buildings on our high streets, and a lot of them are vacant, underused, at risk. So how can we start to use those and reclaim them for community use, or reclaim part of them for community use, but in a sort of sustainable way? I think it's sort of working out from a regeneration point of view, you know, how can we make that happen? Because there's a lot of money needed up front, and then there's also a lot of funding often needed to kind of sustain that going forward. So how can we find sort of financially viable solutions? And then talked about inside the buildings, fronts, and then also the public realm, the bit that stitches everything together, the flat surfaces. We do a lot of work on looking at vacant plots and testing meanwhile uses, so doing things like urban beaches underneath flyovers to try and sort of test how places could be used in the future, and also pavilions and outdoor events, and kind of weaving sort of art and placemaking into that. So when you arrive to a place, it feels like it speaks of where it is. Because a lot of high streets are underinvested. Recently there's been a bit more funding. A lot of them are privately owned, a lot of them are vacant, a lot of them are just quite underused, but also really used at the same time. So yeah, we always work with local communities, tapping into existing partners and people to understand what makes these spaces and these places special. So kind of not starting from scratch and sort of thinking, yeah, someone's already doing that. That often happens. And how can we enhance that? So then today's talk is going to be, broadly speaking, based around 3 case studies. So I'll work in Thornton Heath, which is working with local community shopkeepers and artists. Then I'll work in Luton, which is looking at some derelict and underused hat factories. And then finishing on Filwood Community Centre, which is a live project at the moment. It's about to start, well, we've just gone through tender. So we're going to be starting on site quite shortly. And that one is, this one was a project that we worked with involving local artists and also community engagement expert Daisy Froud. And then these two are working with Fleet Architects and Hayhurst Architects, so partnering with larger practices. So I work on Thornton Heath High Street. I mean, this is a picture of Thornton Heath High Street before we did any work to it. I think the council aspirations are to kind of tart it up and make it look pretty, which I think is an interesting challenge, because in a way it is, you know, it's kind of chaotic, but it's also quite vibrant and fun. So it's worth making sure that whatever improvements we do don't sort of make everything bland and do a sort of cream or whitewash. So I think things like this are often problems where there's sponsored advertising, oversized signs, there's pavement clutter, but also that pavement clutter is great because when you go into a shop, you see it. So let's not just kind of ignore it and sort of tuck it away and hide it. And so the council had certain aspirations for the projects. We kind of had similar aligned ones. So we looked at a lot at kind of looking at whole parades and to almost doing like a good design guide of how we can improve the shops. But also one of the things that we brought to the project is we were like, okay, we can do shop fronts, we can do high level painting works and improvements to the facades, but actually we really should be working with local artists to do murals on the high street, because some of our work there we found out that there was a really strong artist community on the high street, and we thought, and around that area, a very strong music and culture scene as well, and it'd be great to display some of that richness on the street, because you're kind of going down here, it looks kind of slightly like any sort of outer London high street. Or so shopfront improvements, sort of beginning, before and after. This is the kind of like scope of the work, looking at parades as a whole and thinking about reinstating the sort of divisions between the shops, creating alignment, but within that having quite a lot of fun. So I think one of the things to say is a lot of the high street's constantly changing and constantly evolving. You do an improvement at low level, you come back a year later, 5 years later, that shop's gone. So how can we make improvements which also are impactful and are there for a long time? Because some of these projects they're quite relatively small budget. So this project to do 28 shop fronts, 6 artworks and high levels was £500,000, which isn't very much money. So quite a lot of it is quick, sharp wins, improve a shop front, try and generate more investment, try and generate other shops to do the same. But often you come back and that investment has gone in terms of the low levels. I think painting high level and improving that kind of creates real impact longer term. And really, in order to define what we improve and where, we're working really closely with our council team, which is Croydon Council, and the funders, but really our client is not, even though they're paying our bills, the client really is very much the local community, and finding out from the outset what do they want to improve and where, and also the local businesses, working with 28 separate clients on their individual shopfront design. So it's quite complex and quite challenging, but kind of amazing as well. So we have quite a strong engagement strategy on this project. So right from the outset, trying to understand where people wanted to improve, where should we spend the money, how should we spend the money, and then through to kind of engagement events, getting a lot of local artists to also help with that engagement. I think quite often there's always just one voice of the architect. And I think that sometimes, I think working with local partners and getting them to sort of support the project, but also design a lot of the project is great, because otherwise it's just our one hand in a way. So initially, just looking at the high street, working out what buildings people loved, what buildings people hated, and doing strategies for, this is actually the station, and then this is a kind of cluster of independent businesses along there. So we focused on 2 areas. And that also added to the kind of public realm improvements. So at the same time, there was bits of the landscaping, new lighting, new signage, new trees happening. So focusing it on those areas. And then I love this map actually by Ben Connors, who's one of the artists who was working on the project, sort of collecting not only which buildings you like and what you want to see improving, but also what's the high street to you, what are your stories, how can we sort of draw that out? And Daisy Froud, who we worked with, did this quite nice kind of set of observations. I think things like links to the green spaces, or the fact that in Thornton Heath you can really see the sky, or the sort of locally loved landmarks. But also, more importantly, Thornton Heath has got an amazing arts week, and there's no art on the high street, it's not visible at all. And it also has an amazing music scene, especially young black music. And at the time, I think Stormzy had just won a whole round of MOBO awards, and none of this was apparent on the high street. So this is where we started working with local artists to get them involved. It's kind of incognito nature. So these are all quotes from the community. And looking back into Thornton Heath, sort of past as well is always interesting, and there was a lot of murals on the high street, so we thought, okay, great, well, let's reinstate those and reinterpret those in sort of modern ways. So that kind of created, when you walk down the high street, there's a series of sort of blank flank walls. There's one at the end here. So actually those became opportunities for welcome signs. And that a lot of the kind of, so when it came to, we basically got the commission, and then halfway through we thought, let's work with local artists. And then a lot of the engagement work, all of these kind of things that people were telling us, made an artist brief, and we did an open call out inviting artists to participate in the project. And that was a great way to, like I said, have another hand, have someone else doing designs on the high street, but also just publicising the project and telling people if things are happening so they're aware of it. Because even though it's quite a light touch project, I think, you know, people get quite sometimes a bit worried about when there's change, and they kind of want to know what's happening. So quite a lot of it is communication, but also having communication in a participatory way and not just, oh, this is happening. So there's some quite nice elements which came out, which were given to the artists for their brief. One of the things people said is that they don't know more shabby. They didn't want to have like Croydon around the corner had a lot of like street graffiti art, and they wanted their artworks to be, the general public wanted their artworks to be quite considered and quite sort of complete and not feel like, oh, it's edgy and cool. And they didn't want that. They didn't want more shabbiness. They wanted sort of pieces or like celebrating diversity, celebrate the youthful energy of Thornton Heath, thinking about more nature. So thinking about how we can incorporate nature into some of the artworks. And this was a piece by Matt Pringle, who, because the call out was just to local artists, so it was very much quite a small catchment. Matt did a series of sort of lino cuts which celebrated Thornton Heath's hidden nature. So Crystal Palace football ground is just around the corner. You know, every Saturday, whenever the football matches, you have streams of people coming here, and then the rest of the time it's completely empty. So there's kind of strange dynamic, a bit like you get in Arsenal. So that's Kayla the eagle. Then there was the albino squirrel, which is a local legend in the local park. And then there was, I've forgotten the rest, I think there was a local fox, which is always around. So it was really celebrating that and then trying to translate some of that sort of greenery down into the shop front, and also sort of coordinated with New Street furniture and planting. I love this work. This is by Ben Connors, who he was basically, his kind of brief, because to all the artists we said you have to choose one local group to work with. And he worked with a sort of hard to reach group called Fico's World, which was a youth group. Sadly, it was set up by the mother of a boy which was murdered in some sort of local rivalry. And so he worked very closely with them to make a map which kind of explored Thornton Heath as a living organism and took a lot of their words. And this was a giant speaker. I think, that was it. Every so often there's a guy who comes out of a wall of speakers and puts it in the park and has a big dance and things like there's a complicated place and there's something about that, or you can really see the sky in Thornton Heath. So there was quite lovely kind of quotes weaved into these artworks. And lastly, Philip Dennis, looking at the historic photos of the old cinema building and doing a piece interpreted by that, using sort of community art walks where we kind of collected shapes of Thornton Heath. And the nice thing is that was kind of initiated by us, and then it was taken over by the community, and then there's a kind of artwork trail now on Thornton Heath, which has been constantly added to. So I think these projects are very much kind of like, well, they're successful, they're kind of like a jumping platform for more things to happen. And then, you know, working with the community in terms of what they want to do and where, but also working with the shopkeepers very closely in terms of why is there halal butchers slightly different to the halal butchers 3 doors down, because on that high street in particular, there's about 5 halal butchers, and working out what is their sort of unique selling point, and working with Muriel from the party wear shop or the hairdressers and trying to display some of these kind of wares on the high street, and also not being shy of colour, and just using pattern to kind of draw people in. This is actually an image from Tottenham shops, but we had quite a nice, there was a nice photographic commission at the end who also then photographed a lot of the shopkeepers. And then this is Minicab, which kind of took cues from the library down the road in terms of the sort of super graphics, and we had these kind of fence panels which had sort of canvases for future art, and then doing some sort of maps on the actual window itself. So consultation and co-design, big part of that process, making sure that shopkeepers, because quite often shopkeepers want a sign like this, you know, like they want to have presence, and I think that's why using colour is a great way to make them stand out. But actually taking them through these kind of good design guides in terms of like, yeah, but you don't need to say shop, 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 and trying to sort of sort of pare down some of that sort of graphic language whilst retaining a lot of joy, I think. That's the kind of challenge, I think. And just on this slide, we've just done some work in Keynsham together with Baines, so Bath and North East Somerset Council. And I think personally, this is Heritage Action Zone, so a lot of funding's been put into, I think it was like 100 high streets nationwide, which were at-risk heritage, so places which are often, like Keynsham, it's not Bristol, it's not Bath, it's a bit underinvested, but has got amazing heritage behind it. So cultural programmes, shopfront improvements, upper improvements. So I think this is a great example of how you can inject colour and fun into a conservation area. And it is, I would say, very sort of conservation minded, but it's also joyful. And the shopkeeper is taking her colours. So she's got two shops, so she wanted them slightly differently. One is a refillable shop and one of them is a cafe. And then also working with Lucy, who's here, like reinstating sort of traditional windows up the front as well, and fixing a lot of drainage issues. I think with these conversations, there's a lot of conversations and there's a lot of consultation. And at the end of it, you often just have a shop front, but I'll tell you, there's so much work that goes into it. And that's a little pop-up shop, which was by Baines, that we looked at the frontage. It's a sort of community art space, and that's also in Keynsham as well. Okay. So that's a little bit of a taste of the work that we've done on frontages. Now I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the work that we did in Hat District, which is Luton has got an amazing hat making heritage. I don't know if you're aware of that. I used to go to Luton as a child. My mum's a milliner, so I've got kind of quite nice ties to it. And this is one of the factories that we derelict, completely remodelled and brought back into use. And this is a map from 1932, which just shows the kind of density of what was happening there. You know, trimming warehouse, felt warehouse, straw, and printers, and it's just this amazing richness. And the challenge really for this project was to try and bring that to open up quite a lot of these factories, make them usable by the public, but also do that in a sustainable way. Footnote, the reason I got involved in this project is because at the time I was doing a installation for Korean craft biennale. Iris and I were doing it. We were working with my mother, who's a milliner, on a digital 3D printed hat collection, which looked at GAT hats and light projections. So at the time we were doing that, and which is why we got involved in the hat making project, because Fleet was like, well, why don't we go in this together? And I think we agreed a good team with both of us. So this is the Hat District area, and it's sort of named sort of the cultural quarter. You've got the station here, and it's a real like entrance into the town, especially if you're arriving by train. And within that, Luton, to the Culture Trust, previously the Luton Culture, which I like always make a mistake. They're not the council, but they work very similar to the council. They run a lot of the council library services. So in a way, they have the same agenda and aspirations of regeneration as the council, but they have a lot more freedom to act quickly, and they also have a lot more kind of funds in a way that they can tap into. So they bought one vacant plot, and then they definitely bought these two buildings. I'm not quite sure about this one, but this is an existing art centre. So as part of this strategy, the existing art centre was remodelled by another architect, and then we looked at this completely vacant building and Hat Works and Hat House. And the strategy here was, how can we get them working in terms of being viable, and how can we refurbish them? And we got a lot of money from heritage funds and Historic England. But the model was, we're going to use workspaces and co-workspaces as a sort of viable model. But instead of having one building where this happens, we're going to split different types of workspaces across different buildings. The idea being that the first step in your journey, Hat Works here, is also a public reception into the cultural quarter. So it's also like a gallery and a place you can find out about Luton's heritage. And then within that, you've got hot desks, co-workspaces, and you subscribe to a membership model. Quite a lot of that is subsidised at this point. And then as you grow, you move to bigger and sort of better and more kind of plushly fitted out as well spaces, which bring in quite a lot of commercial revenue to support and subsidise some of the kind of work that's happening earlier on. So this is kind of, it was all about sort of nurturing talent. So there's a lot of creatives in Luton. Luton's 20 minutes away from London, so it's pretty well connected, but it's also a very affordable place to live. So, and there's a lot of kind of talent there. So it's about nurturing talent, but then also holding on to that talent. Because quite often what happens in places which are quite cheap to live, amazing talent, people start making money and they go off to London or they'll go off to other places. So the way here was to try and have a suite of different types of workspaces to try and sort of nurture and create that community. And because everybody was in a membership model, that the people in the kind of first step hopefully start to get conversations with the people who are more successful. And you know, a bit like here, you've got this kind of ecosystem where you've got workspaces at the top, which you rent, and then you've got hot desks. You've also got people like you coming in, finding about us. So kind of similar model, but across several buildings. So this is how it works. This is the one that we refurbished, totally restored. It was completely derelict together with Fleet Architects. And the main move was there was this kind of quite amazing tiny staircase, and we had to insert a whole new circulation core into this listed building. And this is actually Luton's oldest surviving hat factory as well. So it was quite special, but the planners were actually very good, and they were, you know, very open to a lot of our kind of moves, and they could see that the building's derelict and the alternative is for it just to lie there and not be used. And this was this kind of idea of the front room for Hat District, like I mentioned, this kind of showcase at the beginning. And historically, and actually there was I was talking to someone the other day about a building in Midsummer Norton, which also used to be a house. Anyway, quite a lot of buildings on our high streets, which then become libraries or then become factories, were originally houses. And because they're houses, they are quite sort of closed off and not very open. And also quite a lot of the rooms within it are very cellular. So I think that was one of the key challenges, was try and open it up and also try and improve the relationship to the street. So when we started the project, this was the plan on the left. So tiny staircase, 2 tiny staircases, both, you know, you can use small rooms, no daylight, and there was this kind of quite amazing outdoor covered yard, but no daylight in there. And then the kind of proposal introduced a lobby, which suddenly meant that this front door could be open, which immediately made it more kind of, you know, you want to go in, what is this? It looks public. And then inserting a new lift circulation core here. And then this was a kind of membership only sort of social spaces. So dropping sills and making this kind of one space with a glass roof on top. And that was developed with creative pioneers. So quite interesting talking about, they were basically residencies. So you applied to do a residency where you either got free or subsidised workspaces. And we worked quite closely with them to develop what type of spaces they needed. Because when we started working on the project, there was a lot of conversation about wet workshop spaces, more sort of digital fabrication. But the demand, because there's the college nearby has got a lot of those facilities, that actually transpired that the demand for people doing it's quite digital, basically. So these spaces became less workshop-based and more kind of workspace-based, and that was sort of developed with these sort of creative pioneers who got these subsidised spaces. And within this, you've got kind of commercial, rentable boardroom, which is open to the other members and also open to everyone sort of citywide to try and get more revenue in as well. So massive, extensive heritage restoration, taking the roof off, a lot of dry rot in the building, very small domestic spaces as well. But there was amazing character to these spaces, things like chipping away at these boards and these kind of infill panels. This is the covered yard, which essentially we kind of left as much as possible and put a glass roof on. So the approach here, amazing kind of layering. So I think any kind of new insertions that we did, we wanted them to look kind of quite deliberate. And so, and we also wanted to retain and reuse as much of the existing fabric and keep that character, quite a lot of these boards had dry rot. We did quite a lot of big process numbering all the boards and taking them away, drying them, bringing back. I think the contractor may have thrown some out in the meantime. And then this was the kind of completed building, which used a lot of those kind of boards, a lot of those kind of marks and conduits originally, and sort of hat singer chairs, and then when you had the kind of new insertion of the stair, retaining the existing doors, so it really feels like a sort of new insertion, retaining a lot of those marks. There used to be a kind of like a hatch, not a lift, but a sort of hoist. Yeah, that's it. And then this was the space at the back. I think originally we were looking, the budget was very tight. I think originally we were looking at sort of more weaving in a lot of the kind of weave patterns, which would have been quite lovely. And then that's the kind of completed project. And then these kind of space objects are clocking in, and clocks and objects were then sort of rehung in the spaces. And then this is just talking about their kind of entrance here, having that open most of the time, using light projections when there's events on. And then the other kind of building opposite was Hat House, and that's sort of towards the end of your journey. So they're very large, open plan workspaces which can be hired, but are also designed in such a way that you can sort of start to break them up if the demand isn't there. And the existing spaces, they were being used, but no lift, tiny, very narrow staircases, downstairs, no daylight. So actually there were very sort of low rental incomes and leaking roofs. So the main move here was to insert a new kind of lift through the back, but also create a kind of big double height space at the front to bring light into this basement space in order to create like a food and beverage spaces at the front. I quite like these sketches because it's really trying to look at like how this heritage building can be more welcoming. And at the moment, when we kind of got the project, there was steps going up to the front. So we had to create level access. It was quite complicated how to negotiate all the different levels. So that you can actually go off the street, you have a sort of shop window, you have a double kind of colonnade, which starts to reflect some of the colonnade motifs at the front. So to create an active street frontage. And this is the project which is finished, so sort of similar approach. The client was really kind of wanted to have that sort of almost as if light touch, almost as if nothing's being done, but it's all insulated, it's all, it's all watertight. So enabling some kind of large plan spaces and tenancies. On the ground floor, Panama hat factory makers moved back in. So that was quite quite a surprise really. But that was quite lovely that they're on the ground floor, so they've got that street frontage and sort of creative agencies further up top. And also that thing about like placemaking on high streets and making sure that if you're walking past, that's a hat factory. So we worked with this artist, Tom Perman and Mark Titcher. He created these kind of lovely hat pins on the buildings, which are really lovely. And I also really enjoy that the mortar, where the mortar repairs have been done, rather than trying to blend it in, it's kind of obvious. So you kind of see that the building's constantly changing.
Visible mending.
Yeah, exactly, visible mending. Yeah. That was before it was hot. And then the kind of public space. So that's the Hat Factory, which is an existing art centre. Hatworks is here, Hat House is here. And then you've got this kind of space. So more and more performances are happening here, and you're kind of using those buildings as backdrops, which is really exciting. And lastly, just wanted to talk to you about existing community buildings and the Filwood Community Centre and Library, which we're working with Hayhurst Architects and with Sophie, who's here on the front row. She's one of the clients, one of our many clients. Sophie is, we do comms in Filwood Community Centre. So this project is part of Filwood Broadway regeneration project. There's 6 of them. Filwood is in South Bristol, for those of you who don't know. It's quite an under-deprived area, an under-invested area. And I think one of the key challenges of this project as well is that over the last, 20 years, maybe more, people have been constantly promised that regeneration projects are going to happen, and then they haven't happened. So I think one of the key challenges on this project, we led on the engagement and co-design, And I think one of the key challenges is telling people it's happening by the end of the year, which we'll see if that happens, but, imminently. And also, I think there's a lot of engagement fatigue as well. People being asked a lot about what do they want, and so sort of tapping into what's already happened as well. And also the Filwood Community Centre itself has an amazing engagement team. So we were sort of leading on the sort of architecture bit, but you guys already do so much stuff with the local community. So in a way, it was a bit of a dream project because the community exists, the sort of people are engaged already. Yes, do you want to
just say?
Yes.
You may have heard of this area as Knowle West. This is the ward is Filwood. This is Filwood Community Centre. The estate is Knowle West, and I'm just mentioning that because it's got a bit of a reputation.
Yeah, no, you're right.
To have heard of Knowle West,
yeah.
Not so much Filwood. So
yeah, no, it's a good point actually, and I think that's part of it as well. Part of the changes which are happening. So there's changes to the community centre, which are here at the top. There's changes to the shops. There's changes to empty sites. Also, a lot of buildings historically have been demolished, like the cinema, like the swimming pools, and people are just feeling quite negative. Why are these things being demolished and not being replaced, And I think you're right about perception. We went out and spoke to a lot of people about what do you want the community centre to be like, and a lot of the responses were like, we want it to grow, we want people to come here from our local community, but also to come from wider Bristol. We don't want people to think we live in this kind of like awful poor area. And then sadly, actually, quite early on in the project, there was I don't know if it's relevant, but there was quite a lot of stabbings. It was in the regional press. There was a couple of knife killings just around the corner, and that sort of further added to all these kind of issues that we're just the architects, but it's just kind of that perception and then change.
And because it's such a tight-knit community as well, something like that. I mean, it was 2 teenage boys were murdered, and it just everybody knows everybody, and so everybody knew somebody, or somebody had gone to school, or their son had gone to school with them, or that was next door. One of our members of staff, it happened outside their house. It's it had a huge impact, but I will say sorry, I don't
No, I like it. It's a good dynamic.
But it really demonstrated what a tight-knit, close community it is, that everyone just really rallied together and raised money. There was an enormous funeral, and it really brought people. An awful way for it to happen, but it really brought people together, and it showed that actually this is a really loving and caring community, and when something awful happens, everyone's there for everyone else, and it's nice.
Yeah.
Anyway,
no, thank you. So it sits, community centre, that's by Sophie's office, probably in the darkest space imaginable. Office, cupboard. So it's got this amazing relationship to the public realm. This whole Knowle West was built homes for heroes after the war, a lot of houses. So it's a lot of kind of brick residential area. It's got amazing frontage. But there's a lot of kind of empty shops, which are used a lot for community projects, that's the upside, and it'd be interesting how that develops in terms of anyway, different conversation. So we were, this section of the slides was made for a children presentation, so some of it goes like, hey! So we were basically brought, because we did a lot of work with the local school, but so our main brief was to make this, which we've been talking to people said, oh yeah, there's going to be a zombie invasion, I'm going to go here, because this is like, it's got one entrance, it's got frosted windows, it's got another entrance there. It's like really inward facing. It's got an amazing courtyard in the middle, which is really underused. So to make this frontage more welcoming, to make it eco-friendly, a huge part of the brief was basically to do a huge amount of, we're working with Integral engineers and Green Gorge, who, I don't know if Integral's here because they're based in Bath, but to sort of retrofit the building and add more space. So I think we're increasing it by about 75%, and also add a library. So down the road, there's Filwood Library. It's open 22 hours a week. Quite a lot of the time it's closed. So actually, why don't we make our community centres work harder for ourselves by basically intensifying use, and the times that the library's closed, well, the community centre can maybe use some of those spaces.
past I live in Knowle. So
Oh, do you?
I go to the Fab Lab loads over at Filwood Green Business Park. And the first time ever, I go there like quite frequently, I saw a couple go into the library. Like I'd never seen anyone go into that library before.
Well, whenever I try and go, it's also closed. Yeah.
Well, we're doing open mic nights there regularly now.
Yeah, and that's quite a nice thing about transitioning and thinking about libraries in different ways. You know, like what is a library now? You know, most of us are not very there for the books necessarily, but also books are an important factor to it too. So the kind of main strategy was to do a big extension at the front and have this Filwood sign, which at the moment there is a Filwood sign. Also the Broadway is called the Broadway, that street where it's on, because of the cinema which used to be there. It was named after the cinema. There's a whole thing about like Filwood local heroes and Filwood signs and Filmwood. So in a way there's a kind of slightly sort of Hollywood BAM kind of narrative going on. So the kind of strategy was to keep the building as much as possible as it is. There's only a tiny bit of demolition at the back, retrofit it and add these extensions at the front, in the middle, at the back. And then that also, what I was saying about this great asset of where it sits on the green, by having these kind of big glass windows, it's connecting and allowing views in, but also by doing an extension in the middle, improving the relationship of the courtyard and the building.
And also the fact that that road immediately outside will be pedestrianised, so it'll be access. We've got the park and the green, and it'll be...
It's all, you can just flow in and out of it.
Yeah.
At the moment you've got some awkward ramp. Also the courtyard, people have described it as an oasis, and it is amazing, but it's also 1 metre below where you go around this kind of funny perimeter walkway, and it's 1 metre below and there's barriers all the way around it, and there's kind of a couple of locked entrances. So again, like amazing asset, underused. So we're actually bringing the level of the courtyard up using some of the rubble for the demolition at the back. And one of the key strategies was this kind of public living room at the front. Because we wanted to put the library at the front, right? So you walk past and you see that there's a library in there. But actually, the library's only open like 3 days a week or something, and very limited hours. So you don't want this kind of amazing frontage to be like, have lights out half the time. So actually, there's the strategy of a public living room, which really is a kind of foyer and breakout space for the library when the library's closed. Sorry, when the library's open. And when the library's closed, that just becomes a space used by the community centre. So it's this kind of in-between shared spaces. And a lot of the project was looking at how to make the spaces more efficient and work better. I think originally we were going to expand it more, and we actually needed to expand it less. I think we worked out that we were looking at the uses. The biggest use for the building was toilet circulation and storage, I think, in terms of like percentage of what is what.
There's a lot of rooms as well at the moment because it was built in the 1930s and it hasn't had the money spent on it that it's needed at times. There are rooms which can't be used because they're damp and the windows leak and they're not secure. So we've got a lot of rooms which are kind of storage because they can't be used. Like we've got a horrific skittle alley at the back.
Yeah, and that's just, and your office is just the tiniest, I mean, it's a cupboard basically.
It's a cupboard, yeah.
So we, so together with Filwood Community Centre, we put on a lot of engagement events, and also quite often, you are Sophie? Quite often it's also hiding the engagement events within huge community fairs, and we worked really closely with like Knowle West, Knowle West Alliance? Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, with Knowle West Alliance, a local community group. So having huge events, 600 people came to one of them, which was amazing. Doing a lot of drop-ins, working with local schools, just finding out really how the building works. So this is just doing quite a lot of analysis with the existing tenants. Which bits do you use and which bits do you not use, and where are their opportunities? And quite a lot of complicated tenants as well, which anyway, I could go into this forever. I should move on. But
I was going to say, Alicia, I think probably about 3-ish minutes.
3 minutes, perfect, perfect. So working out sort of past, present and future Filwood, people's wishes for it, doing a lot of kind of large scale models. This model was like this big, and asking people how they wanted their spaces to be like. This living room should be welcome and homely. And then also for people who didn't make it to the centre, just reaching out, going to the library, doing things in the it's just that's a community centre in the window reflection, but that's just a charity shop where people go a lot actually to the charity shop. It's great, I love it. And actually doing things in there and reaching out and then creating a community brief in terms of what people want, in terms of aspirations, as well as like, I want to do yoga in smaller spaces, or I want to have a kids' party. So running a lot of community events, also linking local groups. We did a lot of work thinking about what is a children's library. So 200 kids, I think, for World Book Day. Also working with existing tenants who do train up young people to become chefs and getting them to cater for the food, and doing test beds. So this is a giant F-shaped planter. People said, oh, you can't grow any food or allotments in this space. It's going to get vandalised. It's going to be terrible. Last I spoke, there was no vandalism. Yeah, and so actually, this is going into a huge kind of little planter, and A, told people stuff is happening, B, that stuff is happening at the front, and C, linked local gardening groups with the school, and then, so there's 2 co-design elements in the scheme where we've been working very closely with young people, asking them what is a library. It's not just a quiet library, can we learn in other ways? Doing model making workshops. I'll skip through this. Thinking about like themes of nature and colour and ceiling installations with kind of signage, translating into a design for the library, which is a lining, which has been taken from sort of Filwood landmarks, which were collected in community walks, and sort of creating a kind of quite extravagant, amazing sort of ceiling. And then also doing acoustic panels, which are inspired and made with children, working with Knowle West Media Centre, which is around the road. There's this place which works a lot with young people. And finally, we're actually working with Knowle West Media Centre to design a piece of furniture in this space. So I'm really excited about that. We've done quite a few workshops which got this giant oversized F, and we're working with them to create patterns which are made from abstracted maps, which will then be put onto a piece of furniture which takes the kind of F and starts to explore it. So we had a workshop last week where they started to extrude and extrapolate and think about a sort of space where you can read a book but also chill, meet friends. That is, I think there's just a couple of slides which is talking about the space in between buildings. So more and more interested in sort of creative technology and lighting and public art, and how we can. It's a time machine which was designed for Bromley High Street, where H.G. Wells was born. This is a pavilion project that we did in a new build area of Stratford, outside the British Council offices, creating like a 9-metre table where people can meet outside. You don't have to like go inside and buy a coffee every time you want to meet. And that opened just before COVID. So that was brilliant because it was a great outdoor meeting space. Yeah, and sort of the idea of having sort of a curated route, and that was going to be a family of many across the public realm. Yes. And I'd love to do more projects. And I'd love to do more projects in Bath. So I think that's the thing. I've done a lot of projects in South West more and more, project in Yeovil, Midsummer Norton, but actually it'd be really great to collaborate with more makers and people and creatives here. Yeah. Yeah, thanks.
We've got a few minutes if anyone wants to ask any questions. Any out there, James?
The last one. Thanks, Alicia, so much. It was all colourful and community-based and collaborative. So many great to see you. I don't know how many people are architects in the room, but I'm really interested in how, well, your story about how you wanted to commission the art and not do it yourself on the high streets, for example, and you're working with a larger practice as a smaller firm. And so I'm really just interested in that collaborative, the way you're collaboratively working, and how do you get past how do you get past that idea? Oh, you know, you're creative. Why? You told us why you commissioned the artists. You know, I wrote it down. There was sort of actually the commission itself was good for the publicity of the project and stuff. How do the bigger architects feel? Why do they get you involved? And what's that?
Yeah, I think there's literally a question. I mean, I think on the Filwood Community Centre, I think part of the reason was that we do a lot of engagement work and we do a lot of co-design, and Hayhurst do as well. But I think the project sort of felt like it needed to have quite a strong community emphasis, and quite often I think it's quite, even though we're doing design elements in that project too, but I think quite often it's quite good when that's kind of sectioned out, meaning that often if it's the architect doing the community consultation, that's good, but it's also again having another voice and also having someone else who's almost like a mediator or someone else you can speak to. However, I also think it's great. I really enjoy being an architect when I do architecture projects, and I'm also doing the engagement and I'm doing all the design because it's sort of quite seamless in terms of the transition. So I think they got us involved because of the brief, because of the fact that it was a lot of emphasis on community engagement and working with the community centre. But I also think they got us involved because at the time they didn't have a Bristol office. So I think quite a lot of London practice, well established, all of these Londoners, why don't we pair up with a local practice? So I do think that was also a big draw. And also Nick and I had, because I used to be external examiner at Brighton University on the architecture course, and I used to teach there as well. And Nick also teaches there, so we had a sort of relationship where we got on, and I think I love Hayhurst's practice. I think we have quite a similar vision and aesthetic, or I would like to think. But it's also quite challenging because I think on this project, Filwood Community Centre one, it's great, but the time frame is so fast that often I feel like I'm doing our bits, but often I feel a bit cut out of the process. And that sounds negative, but it's simply because, it's at tender. I mean, it's so fast. The project is £10 million, so just to give you a scope in terms of the sort of size of it. And so I think sometimes there is that thing that it's just running, and you've got to kind of keep checking in to make sure you're up to date.
There's a lot of stakeholders as well with that one, because you've got us, you've got obviously all the community groups. Obviously the council is the real client, but the council's very much run it like, well, you know the people, you do the most of the work, but there's so many.
And I feel a bit like
in
now
the pie.
We've sort of dropped out of the engagement.
Yeah, I was thinking today, I haven't seen you for ages.
But I think that's sort of also okay, because we were always supporting you, your team on the engagement, and that was in a way bringing it up to the kind of level that we are now. And then the engagement's continuing. It's just that we're not that involved.
We're in this point now where there's nothing to engage on. Because it's in a.
But soon there was also a whole discussion about what's going to happen to the centre temporarily. I don't know what the latest resolve is, but obviously the community centres originally was going to be open throughout, but because the budget is tight, phasing things and separate things, and you're moving from there to there to there to there, and the contractor just wants to hoard the site, take it over, I'll save you £1 million right there, So then there was discussion about having a temporary community centre and having a temporary sort of place. Anyway, I don't know what the latest discussions are, but that's an interesting engagement aspect as well, is sort of how is that managed, how do you make sure we don't lose the tenants, because there's also paying tenants in the centre. So it's sort of a bit like, Sorry, any more questions?
This is brilliant, and I love the notion of like bringing unused spaces back to use for community. My concern always with these sort of projects is how do you future-proof it, and where does business planning come into this? Because there's obviously a lot of capital investment to start with, but then 10-15 years down the line, is it going to be a derelict, vandalised thing?
Yeah. Well, I think that's why the Hat District model is a good one, because we worked quite closely with the Luton Culture had their own business plan, and they had, they worked out all the rents they can get, and they could work out that actually this little bit we can give out to the reception gallery space, and then the rest of it. Then you've got the arts centre, which was already running, the existing one, so it was proven that it was big enough and could get enough revenue. So I think that that is a really interesting question, and I think that's why a lot of them are empty. But I think the Hat District one is doing really well. But it also begs the question of, when we spoke to the community about what do you want in a Filwood Community Centre, everyone said, a cafe, I want a cafe, I want a cafe, I want a cafe, I want a cafe. And actually a cafe isn't viable, or so far is not viable, and may be viable in the future. So what we've done is we've done a kitchen, which a permanent tenant, the chef catering company has. And then there's another kitchen which is hireable, and it goes out onto the sort of public living room event space. The idea being is that could be a cafe in the future, or it could be a pop-up cafe over the summer where a new business wants to test out their model before they move on somewhere else. Or it could just be a hireable space. A lot, you know, there's a guy who's always at the Christmas fair saying, I make chilli and I need to hire out a kitchen to make my chilli pots that I sell at fairs, and he can just hire that out. So I guess it's just designing it in such a way, and not just putting a cafe in there and thinking, yeah, that'd be fine, and then it's just going to be an empty space. And also being able to divide spaces up. So in the Hat District, the big open plan spaces, because you have to think about fire escapes. The lower floors you can subdivide. They were subdivided, but you can take the divisions out, and we can put them back in. So it's a bit of, but it's really challenging, and I think that's why things don't come off the ground.
Part of the thing for us as well, though, is actually making the community centre more commercially viable, so we can be more self-sustaining. Because we're a charity, our main income is through grants, which we've always got to apply for, and there's no guarantee that we're going to get anything. So by having nicer spaces, bigger spaces, more flexible spaces, we can get more income from those, whether that's for long-term rents or just, you know, one night hire or whatever. And that makes us more sustainable. So actually in the future, when the guttering falls down, we can actually afford to get it repaired rather than it just getting...
But there was a whole conversation about batteries and solar panels. So we're putting in this, I don't know how this has been resolved, but there was a conversation about, we're putting all these PV panels, but in 15 years' time you have to replace the battery. And actually, this is all the money that we know we're going to get now, and we're not going to maybe get all those thousands of pounds to replace the batteries in 15 years' time. So what, those decisions, you know, like, okay, it's better, but should we assume that we can get money in the future or not, or, you know? So it is really challenging. I mean, and I think that's why a lot of places are left empty, and a lot of places are left empty because they're also privately owned, and people, you know, it's a lot of energy and effort.
But we have been running for 90 years, so you'd like to think that we'll carry on. You'd like to think that you don't come along, make a load of changes, and then within 10 years we close. That would be quite, I think if we can manage looking like we do for as long as we have, I think the future's, you know, quite bright for us.
I'm really excited, and also the time frame's so quick.
Yeah.
So, what are we? This time next year it should be basically completion. Yeah.
Right. That feels like quite a good place to leave, because I think we're at time. So thanks so much, Alicia. It's really colourful and I feel like we should get a round of applause for the boots.
You know I
Yeah, thank you so much for the talk, and thanks for coming down, folks. You will likely have booked on via our ticket source page. We've got a whole host of events coming up, so do keep an eye on that. We also host regular monthly lunches for practitioners around kind of the cluster of practices that we see in the studio. So we've got a sound and music lunch, an immersive creators and performers lunch, and probably more relevant for you folks, we have a prototyping and design lunch. The next date for that is the 25th of March. It's open to all. So if you want to just come gather with us, Alicia joins us for that frequently. It's really just a place for people working around those practices to get together, share thoughts, ask for feedback on things. We know a lot of people in the creative industries work alone, so it's a nice place to come and find connection. We also will be seeing you at Bath Digital Festival on May 15th. We are hosting the Beings Day, so there'll be showcasing of residents' work and performances there, so please come and find us. And March the 4th, sorry, going back and forth in time, we're hosting an event on the future of the voice after AI with performers and software developers, including from URCAM Paris, and amazing artist Jonathan Reis, who will be doing a live performance. That's at the Locksbrook campus, which is an amazing architectural gem in itself. So yeah, please do come along to those. Also, as we're in kind of placemaking space, I want to shout out Caroline, who is the studio manager at the back here. Don't kill me, didn't know. Caroline co-runs What Next West, which would you like to say a couple of words?
Yeah, I wasn't saying that, but yes. Hello, I'm Caroline. With Kate Arthurs, another resident in this building, I co-chair What Next West. It's a little bit sort of advocacy, it's a little bit policy, all to do with sort of the creative arts, creative practice, creative industries. And we've just taken that over from Penny Hay, if anyone knows who Penny Hay is. Yeah, so we're sort of building on that, on all the brilliant work that she's done. It's relatively new to Kate and I. We've only had like 3 or 4 sessions. But if you sign up to our newsletter, little prompt and promo there, you'll get information on that. But also just look up What Next West online, do a Google. You'll find a tiny bit of a tiny sort of thing on the website, and that should have information about our events. So I can't actually remember when the next date is, so you caught me out there, Nick. But anyway, go onto that website, you'll find details, okay? Thanks so much. Thank you. That was such an interesting talk. Loved to hear about your work.
And shameless plug, if anyone would like to come and have a look at Filwood.
Yes!